At a delivery area, a worker rides on an elevated stack of wooden planks, unaware that one sudden forklift movement can shift the entire load surface beneath him. Riding on unsecured stacked materials lifted by a forklift places the work position on an unstable surface with no reliable control. On a steep hillside roadway, a driver moves a utility truck across the incline, unaware that the slope is already working against the vehicle's balance. Driving across a steep slope places the full weight of the vehicle against its own center of balance. As the truck moves sideways along the incline, gravity begins pulling the upper weight downhill while the tires work to maintain grip. Drivers should move heavy vehicles straight up or straight down steep slopes whenever possible, instead of cutting across the angle. Also, operators must check the terrain, grade, surface condition, and vehicle limits before committing heavy equipment to uneven ground. Inside a warehouse, a worker operates an electric pallet jack carrying a loaded pallet, unaware that the stacked cargo is not properly positioned. If the goods on the pallet are not evenly stacked or properly secured, the center of gravity can shift during movement. Even normal steering or slight floor unevenness can cause the load to tilt further, making the upper layers lean progressively. Once the stack begins to shift, the instability can increase quickly, reducing the operator's ability to correct it while the pallet is elevated. Operators should always verify that loads are properly centered and secured before moving elevated pallets. Facilities must enforce correct stacking practices, ensure stable load distribution, and require checks before transporting lifted freight through warehouse aisles. At an open industrial transport yard, a mechanic works near a heavy dump truck tire, unaware that the pressurized assembly may release its stored energy without warning. Large commercial tires hold a tremendous amount of air pressure, and that pressure must be treated with full respect during inflation or inspection. If a rim, sidewall, or locking component fails, stored pressure can project air, rubber, and metal components across the service area with serious force. Mechanics should use reinforced inflation cages or approved restraint systems when working with heavy commercial tires. Personnel must remain outside the sidewall release path, use remote inflation equipment when available, and check rims, locking rings, and tire condition before applying pressure. At a busy shipping terminal, a worker unlatches a transport container, unaware that a moving truck cab is entering the rear clearance area. Working in a tight, active vehicle corridor leaves very limited clearance when one vehicle begins moving unexpectedly. A truck cab carries enormous momentum even at low speed, and the space between vehicles can be reduced much faster than the work area allows. Any task performed near trailers, doors, and active vehicles must be planned, so workers always have a visible position and an open route away from moving equipment. At an auto garage, a driver lines up a white sedan over a service area, unaware that a sudden press on the accelerator can send the vehicle forward. In confined workshop spaces, even a small throttle input can create immediate forward motion. When a vehicle is already positioned in a tight bay, unintended acceleration or pedal misapplication can quickly turn a controlled alignment task into a rapid vehicle movement. Because the area around the crossing is often used by pedestrians, there may be very little reaction time or space to avoid a moving vehicle. In such environments, precise pedal control and full awareness of nearby personnel are critical to prevent sudden impact incidents. In a loading area, a worker inside a utility truck receives a tall metal cabinet, unaware that the freight is already leaning beyond a safe balance point. Receiving tall, top-heavy items inside a truck bed creates very limited room for correction once the load begins to tip. A metal cabinet carries most of its weight high above the floor, so a small tilt can quickly move the center of gravity beyond the base. The sidewalls of the truck also restrict movement, leaving very little space to reposition the load safely. Manual handling becomes especially risky when the item is large, rigid, and difficult to control from below. Personnel should use lift gates, forklifts, pallet jacks, or other mechanical support when loading oversized inventory. In a tire warehouse, a worker pushes a stack of commercial tires forward, unaware that the movement can destabilize the column positioned nearby. Tall stacks of heavy tires can affect one another when they are stored closely together. When one column is moved or lowered without control, the movement can transfer force through the floor and into nearby stacks. If those stacks are not braced or separated, the vibration and shifting weight can cause another column to lean out of position. Facilities should use mechanical lift trucks or controlled handling methods to break down tall inventory stacks. Personnel must check surrounding materials before moving one column, keep clear of adjacent stacks, and avoid working where nearby freight could shift unexpectedly. In a residential yard, a worker runs toward a rolling utility trailer, unaware that a pickup truck has lost control and is beginning to roll backward into the same rear clearance area. A loaded trailer can continue rolling under its own momentum, while a pickup truck that begins reversing without full control can rapidly reduce the available clearance behind it. In such environments, visibility and reaction time are limited, making it difficult for either the driver or nearby workers to respond in time. Personnel should immediately move clear of any rolling equipment and avoid attempting to stop it manually. Vehicles should only be operated once full control and visibility are confirmed, with drivers using mirrors, cameras, or spotters when operating in tight residential or mixed-use yards. In a busy warehouse aisle, a worker stands beside an active forklift, unaware that the raised load is not fully stable. Standing within the lifting area of a raised forklift load places the work position in the same movement area as materials that can shift without warning. Forklift tines are designed to lift and carry freight, but the load still depends on balance, friction, and proper placement. If the freight moves on the tines, slides forward, or loses its stable position, gravity takes over immediately. Even a brief stop, turn, or uneven floor surface can cause raised materials to drop out of the controlled lifting position. Personnel should remain outside the forklift's operating footprint until the load is fully lowered, stable, and confirmed safe to approach. At a construction site, a mason works from an extension ladder, unaware that the unanchored base can slide away on the smooth concrete floor. A ladder placed on smooth concrete depends heavily on friction at the feet and a proper angle against the wall. As the worker climbs or shifts weight, the ladder feet can begin sliding outward if they are not anchored, blocked, or held by a trained spotter. Once that base movement begins, the ladder no longer supports the work position in a controlled way. Workers should anchor ladder feet, use slip-resistant bases, or assign trained ground spotters when working on smooth surfaces. In a residential yard, a worker balances on an extension ladder while using a powered cutting tool, unaware that the branch being cut is part of the ladder's support. Using a ladder against a tree or branch being cut creates an unstable setup because the support point can disappear during the task. Once the branch is cut through, the ladder may lose the surface holding it in place. The ladder load, tool movement, and shifting timber can all change the ladder's balance at the same time. Cutting work at height must be supported by independent anchors, not by the same material being removed. Arborists should use secured climbing systems, proper harnesses, and independent anchor points for elevated tree work. In a transport yard, a worker reverses a forklift onto a flatbed trailer, unaware that the unsecured deck can shift under the machine's weight. Moving heavy equipment between vehicles requires a properly secured and stable loading surface. As a forklift moves onto a flatbed, its weight shifts the trailer's balance and loads the suspension. If the trailer isn't anchored or docked correctly, the deck can tilt or shift out of position. Personnel should use secured loading docks, rated ramps, wheel chocks, and dock plates for equipment transfers. Drivers must verify that transport beds are anchored and stable before loading. On a residential backyard deck, a homeowner steps onto a loose decking board, unaware that the unsecured plank can flip upward like a lever. Unfastened deck boards can shift suddenly when weight is applied. If not properly secured to joists, they can pivot, causing one side to lift as the other is pressed down. Even a finished-looking surface can behave unpredictably if it isn't fixed to the frame. Builders should fasten decking materials immediately after placing them so the surface remains stable under foot traffic. Personnel should check unfinished platforms before stepping onto them, especially when boards are loose, overhanging, or not fully attached. At a construction site, a laborer swings a hand demolition tool from a narrow scaffold, unaware that loosened masonry can move into the frame. Working from temporary scaffolding during demolition requires a strong separation between the worker platform and the material being broken. As brickwork comes loose, moving masonry can contact the scaffold structure and affect its stability. The platform may also shake, shift, or lose support if heavy material lands against the frame. Foremen should keep active demolition areas clear of temporary support structures whenever loosened material could contact the scaffold. In a busy yard, a delivery tricycle travels across a smooth paved area, unaware that the path ahead ends abruptly at a ramp edge. When a moving vehicle transitions from a flat surface to an unexpected drop or ramp edge, the front wheel can lose smooth contact instantly. This sudden change interrupts forward motion and can destabilize steering, especially for lightweight utility vehicles. Even low-speed movement can become hazardous when surface continuity is broken without warning. Operators should always confirm surface changes ahead, especially near ramps, edges, or loading transitions. At a marble factory, a worker lifts one stone slab with a crane hook, unaware that the slab behind it may no longer have enough support. Vertical slab storage depends on every piece being properly leaned, separated, and secured. When the front slab is lifted away, it may remove the pressure that was helping hold the slab behind it in place. If that rear slab is not independently clamped or supported, its weight can begin moving forward. Facilities should use engineered racks with independent clamps or restraints for all heavy slab inventory. Personnel must keep a wide buffer during active material transfers and avoid working in the forward movement path of unsecured stone or sheet materials. At a rural construction site, a worker tries to steady a shaking cement mixer, unaware that the machine's movement is already beyond safe manual control. A vibrating mixer can generate strong, irregular movement when it is not properly anchored or when the internal load is unbalanced. Once the frame begins shaking, direct hand contact does not provide enough control to stabilize the machine safely. Instead of trying to hold the equipment still, the safe response is to stop power and correct the cause from a controlled position. Construction crews should secure portable mixers on solid, level ground before starting the motor. Operators must shut the machine down during severe vibration, check the load balance, and restart only after the equipment is stable. At a factory, personnel stand near an uncentered crane load, unaware that the first lift can send the steel swinging sideways. A crane load must be lifted from directly above its center of gravity to prevent sideways movement at the start of the lift. If the hook is not plumb over the load, the tension will pull the material toward the point where the crane line wants to balance. Steel that appears still before the lift can become an uncontrolled suspended load once the crane begins applying upward force. Riggers must align crane hooks directly over the center of balance before applying tension. Personnel should keep a wide clearance around initial hoisting operations and use tag lines or controlled guidance methods instead of standing close to the load. At a dark loading depot, a worker is positioned in the rear clearance area of a large transport truck, unaware that the reversing vehicle is moving through a blind spot. The rear of a large truck can hide workers from the driver's mirrors, especially in dark yards, tight depots, or busy loading areas. Once the vehicle begins reversing, the space behind it can be reduced quickly, and the driver may not realize the rear path is not clear. Reversing operations must be controlled through spotters, lighting, cameras, and clear communication before the vehicle moves. Personnel must stay visible to operators, avoid rear clearance areas around active vehicles, and maintain eye contact or radio communication during yard operations. At a residential porch, a rider hits the accelerator while reversing an ATV, unaware that the incline can shift the machine backward out of control. Applying sudden throttle on an incline can quickly change the balance of a small vehicle. When the rear wheels receive power while the all-terrain vehicle is angled upward, the machine's center of gravity can move behind the contact point of the tires. The machine's balance can shift upward at the front before the rider has time to correct the motion. Operators should use steady throttle control when moving ATVs around steps, ramps, or raised surfaces. At an agricultural transmission site, a utility crew balances on a suspended high-tension cable, unaware that a sudden loss of tension can make the line move unpredictably. High-tension cables store a large amount of mechanical energy when they are stretched and suspended. If tension changes suddenly, the cable can recoil, drop, or swing as stored energy releases in a direction that is difficult to predict from the work position. Anyone standing or balancing on the line depends completely on that tension remaining stable. Utility crews should use dual-anchored harnesses connected to independent lifelines during aerial work. Supervisors must monitor cable tension, anchor points, and rigging stability before workers access suspended lines or elevated cable systems. On a residential street, a worker pushes a loaded pallet jack toward a truck ramp, unaware that the edge transition can stop the wheels while the cargo keeps moving. A loaded pallet jack needs a smooth transition when moving from street level to a ramp or truck platform. If the small front wheels catch on a raised edge, the bottom of the load stops suddenly while the taller freight continues forward. That quick change in motion can push the center of gravity beyond the base of support. Operators should use lift gates, dock plates, or power-assisted equipment when moving heavy inventory from street level into trucks. Tall freight should be strapped, stabilized, and moved slowly so the load stays balanced through ramps, edges, and surface changes. In a busy warehouse aisle, a worker walks quickly through the area, unaware that an abandoned pallet jack is resting directly in the walkway. Manual pallet jacks are low to the ground and can be difficult to notice in active walkways, especially when the forks blend into the floor. A worker moving through the aisle may not see the steel frame until the footpath is already blocked. The sudden stop can interrupt normal walking balance and create an uncontrolled movement in the aisle. Walkways must stay clear because even stationary equipment can create a serious obstruction when left in the wrong place. Personnel should park manual lifting equipment in designated staging areas immediately after use. On a factory floor, a worker guides a large steel beam suspended from an overhead crane, unaware that the rigging may not hold the load in a stable position. A suspended beam must be rigged so the weight stays balanced throughout the lift. If the strap, sling, or hitch is not seated correctly, the beam can rotate, slide, or move out of its controlled position. Workers guiding the load by hand are often too close to maintain safe clearance if the beam changes direction. Heavy suspended materials should be controlled from a distance using proper rigging, tag lines, and a clear path around the load. Also, riggers should use the correct hitch, sling angle, and attachment method for asymmetrical industrial loads. In a warehouse, a worker manually pulls a heavy box from a tall pallet stack, unaware that the load can move out of the controlled position once it clears the support beneath it. Removing heavy freight from an elevated position requires more control than one person can usually provide by hand. As the box moves away from the stack, the worker must support both the weight and the changing balance at the same time. If the load shifts forward or slips from the grip, gravity takes over immediately and moves it downward into the work area. Personnel should use mechanical lifting equipment for overweight warehouse inventory, especially when the load is above waist or shoulder height. On an automated factory floor, a worker steps inside the guarded area, unaware that the robotic packaging arm is still moving through its programmed route. Robotic equipment follows program movements with speed, force, and consistency, but it will not stop unless the safety system detects entry and responds correctly. When someone crosses into the operating area while the machine is energized, the arm can continue its normal motion without stopping in time. A quick adjustment inside the cell is not safe unless lockout and interlocks are fully in place. Personnel must apply complete lockout procedures before entering any automated machinery cell. At a construction site, a mason walks along a narrow brick wall to reposition a wooden plank, unaware that the movement can shift his balance on the unfinished edge. Walking along an unfinished masonry wall gives a worker very little surface area for stable movement. When a wooden plank is lifted or repositioned, the worker's center of gravity changes while the feet remain on a narrow base. Without guardrails, scaffolding, or secured height protection, there is no reliable support if the footing becomes unstable. Foremen should require secure scaffolding platforms for elevated material transfers instead of allowing workers to walk along unfinished walls. Crews should use secured height protection, stable access platforms, and planned material handling methods before moving heavy items near open edges. To keep learning from these important workplace safety lessons, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Stay aware, stay safe.